All right. Looks like we're good to get going. So, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming to my last ever grand round. So, before we get started, I would like to do a little bit of a technical disclaimer because I'm not using the presenter view. It is extremely important, unless you unwittingly want to be featured in my presentation, that you keep your cameras off and that you keep your mics muted. I think it's like the equivalent of accidentally hitting the reply all, but for the talk proper, if we could keep those off, that'd be great. And then afterwards, we can do whatever. So I'd like to start us off with a little bit of a story. Once upon a time, there was a bright-eyed, overeager first-year resident. And to paint the scene, it was a general ob shift during the daytime, the dream, right? And it wasn't yet noontime, so the bus hadn't come in. So I was chatting with my staff at the time, it was Adam Quinn. So I remember this story well. That's because he said something to me. He said something to me, a little piece of advice that stuck with me ever since. That's changed and shaped what I think about what's important in both emergency medicine. So, flash forward to about 5 months ago, I'm doing one of these independent shifts, and Adam Quinn is my staff. So, we're coming up to kind of the end of the day, and we're reviewing through our cases. We get to the end of the cases, and just like everybody else, he asks, like, "Oh, is there anything else you want to talk about?" This is a little bit silly, but I get a little bit nervous. Throughout the day, I've been planning out what I wanted to say, how I wanted to get across what I wanted to say, basically. And so I just kind of started into it. Adam, pretty sure you don't remember this, but we worked together one of my first shifts ever of residency, and you told me something. You gave me a piece of advice that's probably been the most positively impactful piece of advice that I've ever gotten. A little bit of a pause, and I'm absolutely sure he had no idea what I was talking about. So you told me every time you go into the room with the patient, take a couple seconds and you find out one interesting non medical thing about them. You told me that I couldn't present their case to you until I told you that one thing. So I go on to tell him how grateful I am and how much of a positive impact that this has had on my residency experience. And to be honest, like, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember how I felt. I got teary, he got teary, and mind you, this was over the phone, so he had to actually tell me this. But through that one piece of advice and that one lesson, I can draw all of the big lessons that I've learned throughout residency. You know, like the big ones, the ones that actually matter. So, one, never about you. It is about the human being that is the patient. They have to know that you care before they let you care for them. This helps you to just bring things back into perspective and do the right thing, even when it's easier not to. Next thing is that please make time for what matters. In life and in medicine, it's so easy to, dismiss a patient because there's fires going on elsewhere or cancel plans with loved ones because that's the new norm. But it really helps to keep in perspective the privilege of what we do, why we're here, and the extremes of the human experience that we ourselves. So, next time you see a patient, just try this. Find out that one interesting non medical thing, and I guarantee you that general ob shift will be a little bit more bearable. Those interruptions will be a little bit less annoying, and you'll feel a whole lot more connected. Now, what was the point of all that? And what I hope you take from that is two things. One, as crappy as our jobs can be, it is the best job in the world. And two, stories are captivating. They're the best way to convey anything. So through this talk, we'll see that the current formats of delivering talks, medical talks especially, are at best a tad outdated, and at worst, they are borderline ineffective. And I hope that together we'll be able to improve at this. Human beings are narrative beings, and we make sense of the world through the link between anyone and anyone else, between what I think and what I want to impart, has to be communicated with stories. So the best way to become a good teacher, a good clinician, a good partner, a good whatever, to get good at telling and listening to stories. So along the way, we'll hear about three stories from my life. Well, two more that have affected my life in the lens through which I form my perspectives. There'll be one from the beginning of residency, middle, and one from the end, each with its own unique lessons. This is aimed at everybody, from PGY 1 to PGY 21, from those a couple years my junior to those many years my senior. Everybody can benefit from becoming a better communicator, and I'm excited to see what each of you will take from this. So here's an overview of the talk and a backbone of how to create a successful and effective talk. So as you'll see, everything in this talk comes in threes because that's ways it's punchy and easier to remember. So a talk is made up of three parts: story, media, the supportive media, and the performance. So these are in chronological order as to how you're actually going to prepare them. This is the beginning, the middle, and the end of your preparation process. But in terms of importance, by far, the story is the most important, followed then by the performance, followed way behind by the supportive media. But I can guarantee, and myself included, the amount of time that we spend on what is completely reversed. Story always trumps style. So you can have an excellent talk with no slides. You cannot have a great talk with great slides and no content. Like anything else, this is something where talent is involved. But like anything else, this is a skill that needs to be practiced and it can be learned. Through the principles, though the principles are at times specific, because we'll be talking about medical talks specifically, they can always be mostly generalized. By the end of this talk, I promise that you will be aware of these principles, and I promise that you will be a better storyteller. You'll give better talks, you'll give unrefusable consults, you'll win arguments with your partners, you'll, in general, just be more fun to be around. Here's the problem. Why do we suck at this? Why is it so easy to binge an entire TV show or watch hours upon hours of YouTube, but it's so painful to listen to 2 hours of straight lecture? Think about this next quote for a second. Anybody who tries to make a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either. Presentations are fundamental to medical education. Think back to the last presentation that you went to. To be fair, some are good, like some are very good, and they apply the principles that we're going to be talking about, but most definitely not. Generally, high volumes of information are presented, and the uncomfortable truth is that not a lot of that is retained. In general, teaching styles have stagnated despite a much more nuanced understanding that we have of learning theory. There's a lack of thought and a lack of preparation into the story that goes behind a presentation and a misguided overemphasis on what actually goes into the slides. But all that being said, the lecture format is ubiquitous. It's not going anywhere. And so if we're going to do it, we might as well do it well. But luckily for us, learning how to tell a good story will help you not only when formally presenting, but in every other aspect of your life. Life is a string of elevator pitches, from consults to case presentations to recaps during a resuscitation. What people perceive about your knowledge capabilities, and ultimately your advancement all hinge on your ability to string that into a compelling. You want to receive due credit and recognition for your knowledge and your contributions. You want your ideas to be remembered and applauded. And to do that, you need to communicate them effectively. So now that we've seen the light and we know that there's important improvements to be had, let's begin with the most important part. Like I said, the story. The story, like we learned back in middle school, has a beginning, a middle, has an end. So that's incredibly easy to say, but it's very easy to forget. When you're in the midst of making your presentation and you're coming up with your arguments and your entire presentation as a string of little arguments that need to be woven together, each of these needing to be introduced, supported, and concluded, and all of that needs to be done in a logical and easily digestible fashion. When you go to a talk and you walk out of it and you say, well, crap, like I have no idea what that person was trying to say. I was so lost. This is what was wrong. And this is why it's so incredibly important that you give this some forethought and take some time to get it right. You'll notice also that we're going to spend proportionally more time on the beginning and on the end, because those are the two times when your audience is going to be at their peak attentiveness and the parts that they're most likely to remember. So here's the $1,000,000 question. You want to start your talk and you want to do it with a bang. How do you do it? So in the first 5 minutes, your audience is going to decide whether they're going to be like fiddling on their phones or whether they're going to actually listen to you. How do you captivate them? Well, this is going to hurt, but do not start with, oh, hi, my name is blank. I'm a PGY blank at the University of blank, and today we're going to be talking about blank. So as easy as that is to do, and that's what it is, it's easy, and that's why it's so prominent, you haven't actually added anything that your audience doesn't know from reading your title slide or like the conference schedule. And if it's not one of those two things, they probably already know who you are. So try one of these three things. Everybody's going to have, a different comfort level with them. So think about them and see which one kind of fits your talk, fits your personality best. Start with a problem, a question that matters to the audience. And this is why case studies with ambiguous answers are so effective. It's very easy for a clinician to say, oh, like I actually saw that a month ago and I was all over up to date and I don't really know how to handle that. You should probably listen to this talk. You can also try a factoid that shocks. So a good example of this, did you know that the number of people living on the world today outnumbers the number of people that have ever lived? That's pretty thought provoking. Doesn't even matter that it's nowhere near true and it's one of these urban myths that's since been debunked, but it gets people thinking, gets people interested. And then you can, relate it to the large epidemiological impact that whatever disease entity you're talking about has. But what I would recommend is an impactful story. That's how we started this talk. Very meta, right? Stories within stories, but people relate to people. Reason that we have so much difficulty listening to 2 hours of lecture, but not a million hours of YouTube or an entire TV show is that medical talks are about disease entities, but stories are about people, not about objects. They're not about things. They're about the people behind those things. But if you want to tell a good story about Emerge, you don't talk about the Emerge. You talk about the people that make up the Emerge, who they are, what matters to them, how they are, and what's most important to the audience. But Richard, you say, we're doing medical talks here. How do we incorporate stories? So we only have to look so far as our own residents and our own colleagues to see this done and to see it done well. So Tatiana earlier this year gave a grand rounds on anorexia, and throughout that talk moved back to a case vignette about a patient, kept going back to it, kept updating us, and in that we became invested not only in the patient in the talk. Shirag gave a great grand rounds on racism in the ED, and this talk was just laced with impactful, powerful stories to communicate main points. And if we go a little bit farther, we can take an example from Dr. Sarah Gray, who's a EDITU doc from St. Mike's. She gives many great talks, but she gives a great talk on perimortem C-sections. She uses her own lived experiences, both good and bad, to really bring us into that room, communicate the chaos of the procedure. So it takes a bit of forethought, but think about using one of these methods to start off your talk, because I guarantee you, bring the audience in and it'll keep them. The other thing that a beginning and introduction does is it delivers what's called an empowerment promise. So what do I, as the speaker, promise to give you as the listeners by the end of this talk? Like basically, why is it worth your time to be here? And you'll notice that I did this near the top of the talk as well. I promised to introduce you to a new and better way of delivering talks, a framework, and to improve your presentations. So next time you prepare for a talk, take a second and just think, what in the next 5 minutes is going to really hook my audience and get them? So now that we've covered the introduction, you've hooked your audience with a promise that you're going to make their lives better. Now onto the meat of the talk and how to communicate all the information that you want to get across. The middle of the talk is, you guessed it, made up of 3 parts. And that's the message, the narrative, authenticity. Now, I understand that this is a fair bit to remember. It's going to be even more to learn to apply. But luckily, there's never going to be like a dying patient who you're going to need to give an excellent presentation to in order for them to survive. You can, and you always should, take the time to prepare any talk that you're slated with giving. My goal today is really to expose you to these principles and have them in the back of your mind so that the next time you need to do one of these, you can bring these up and add them to your presentation. If you leave this talk with an understanding of your own presenting habits and how those might improve. So the first and most important step is to identify your message. Now, why you are presenting is actually much more important than what it is that you are presenting. So ask yourself these focus questions to kind of hone down on your main message and make sure that everything in your talk supports or leads directly back to this. What is your point and why does it matter? In terms of, medical talks, this equates to having one centralized argument, or depending on your talk, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 take-home points that are directly important to your audience. So this is of the utmost importance. You must know your audience and you must focus on your audience. A useful brainstorming question here is like, what keeps my audience up at night? And this is why PE, for example, is such a popular topic to give rounds on. Take a second and again, think about these upcoming quotes and the last talk you gave. So a presentation is about what the audience needs, not center. Help people to see themselves as the hero of the story, whether the plot involves beating the bad guys or some lofty business goal. Everyone wants to be a star, or at least feel like the presentation is addressing them personally. Once you've decided on that main message, the next step is to craft your narrative around that, to storyboard, to brainstorm. You want to create a narrative that you yourself are passionate about. You find your passion, your story within that topic and communicate that, the audience will feel that passion. So, Anand Swaminathan of FOAMED fame once said in a podcast that he would go to any talk delivered by Dr. Amal Matu. Prostate-specific antigen, applications in the ED, I'm there. 101 uses of the Foley balloon, sign me up. That's because Dr. Amamatu just has a way of making any topic that he presents interesting. And this is how he does it. He finds his story, his passion within that topic, and communicates that. Now, we won't go step by step into how to craft this narrative because only you yourself, as a person who's kind of reviewed the literature, reviewed your topic, and has an in depth understanding of it, will know what order to present what argument in. But suffice it to say that all of this needs to be strung together into an easily digestible framework for your audience to digest. So, the basic premise here is that you need to take your audience from a place of not knowing any of your information to a place of accepting your point of view and acting on your point of view. So lastly, once you've decided on your message, you've focused down on it, you've created your narrative, you've done your storyboard, the last part here is to be authentic and make the audience feel. So you can tell stories and the audience can connect with those stories. Then they'll listen to what you have to say and they'll want to act. Say, like all the facts and all of the things that you want to get across are going to be in your slides, but they have to care about you and they have to trust you in order to act on what you're saying. Storytellers, filmmakers, novelists, all of these people understand that it is emotion that impacts people most profoundly. Yes, like the syntax and the structure and all that is important. But what people remember, and again, what is most likely to get people to act, is how the narrative made them feel. Again, what does authenticity mean in medical talks? Like, how do we even do this? Again, we're going to take a lesson from Dr. Sarah Gray. So, authenticity in medicine is about vulnerability. It's about how you can use the realities of what we do to foster support, activity, will to learn, and will to act. All we all miss things. We all make mistakes, and that's why we're so drawn to M&Ms, for example, by being authentic in our story examples, by giving away and talking about our lived experiences, we become vulnerable and we tell stories that connect ourselves and our audience to this abstract concept that is the disease entity. It takes a medical talk and it turns it into one about people. Human stories are one of the most easy to remember and most impactful. So yeah, by way of summary, we've already learned a whole ton. We've learned that, well, now we've started strong with a problem or a factoid or a story. And we've presented our focus message and the meat of our information through a compelling story that's made the audience feel. Now, the last thing we need to do is finish off strong. And so that's going to be with one, a final slide, and two, with your final words. And these both have unique considerations. So we'll start with the final slide. And again, this is going to ruffle some feathers. And I've done this as well. But you don't want your final slide to be like questions, question mark. Again, you haven't really added anything to your talk. And easily be said, and nobody really needs to be reminded that there's a standard question and answer period at the end of your talk, as there is for every other talk. Further to this, consider another trick of Amamatu's, including after the question and answer period. Why does he do this? Well, one, so that the last thoughts in your audience's mind are your own, and two, so that your talk doesn't just kind of like peter out. And we've all seen this. You're in your question and answer period. Someone says, like, any more questions? Oh, I guess no more questions. So I'll let you guys go. Bye. Thanks. You don't want that, right? What you want is your audience's last thoughts to be of your conclusions and the impacts that it's going to have on their lives. So a good summary slide does that. Something like this. So, in the spirit of cycling, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. The story is the most important part of a successful talk. It has three parts: the beginning, which is going to captivate the audience and deliver your empowerment promise; middle, which delivers your message through a well crafted narrative and makes the audience feel; end, which summarizes your conclusions and solidifies your impacts. So, now that you've got that down, you've got your final slide, nice little summary slide, onto the final words. How do you actually end? There are a couple ways that you can do this, three, in fact, and you can see which one works for you. Again, every person is going to have a different personality and a different comfort level with these. So, you can end off with a joke. If you're a naturally funny person, the joke lands. People think they've had fun the entire time, even if your talk sucks. So, great way to end. Second, and this is going to require a little bit more explanation, is thanks. Now, this is probably the most common way to end off your talk. Hear me out. I'm going to argue that you don't want to do it in isolation. So again, thanking the audience, like you haven't really added anything to your talk, and it kind of implies that people have stayed like purely out of politeness. Thanks are good. They express gratitude, which is excellent. But you want to add something else at the end. You want to also salute the audience. A little bit hard to explain, so I'll give an example here. So you're done thanking your audience. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time on your busy day, blah, blah, blah. And then you end off with something like, been great fun being here. Been fascinating seeing what you folks are doing here at the University of Ottawa and the Ottawa Hospital. The questions you've been asking have been stimulating and thought-provoking. Been really great, and I look forward to coming back. You can see how that like nicely ties up things, and it opens up the opportunity for more opportunities. Think about that. And then the last one, which is another trick of Amalmatu's, we're basically stealing all of his talk tips here, but a call of arms works really well in a medical talk, especially. So imagine yourself sitting in a big lecture hall listening to one of Amalmatu's ECG talks. You've just spent like 30 minutes learning about flip T waves in AVL and how that's a subtle sign of MI. You can end off with a call of arms, call to arms, saying something like, now you know. Now that you know that the flip T wave in AVL is one of the first signs of the subtle MI, it is your responsibility not miss that. And furthermore, it's your responsibility to tell your colleagues about that and make sure nobody misses it. Very effective way to end off a medical talk. Those are the considerations for crafting a compelling story to go into your talk, to form your talk. The first and most important step. So now for a little bit of a narrative break. So once upon a time, there was a third-year resident, a little bit more grizzled than the first-year resident, but on top of the world, invincible, knew everything, didn't know what he didn't know, as all like third-year residents are. And I remember this story really well too, for entirely different reasons than the first. When you're like in your bed and you're up late at night and you think of that super cringy thing you did back in high school and you like can't get to bed. This is one of those. So I was coming off of a night shift and I was reviewing with a junior resident and I had to deliver some like not so great feedback. And again, I was nervous because nobody likes to do this. And it was like my first time ever giving bad feedback. The handover comes and goes and we open up the good old 145. We're exchanging like the normal pleasantries and I'm beating around the bush as much as I can. And eventually I just come out and say, I think you're performing below the level of your peers. Full stop. So I don't really know of a good way to say it, but I do know that it's not like that. You want to be more directive, more informative, and less like bad. But the worst part is he or she hit me back with the most reasonable of follow-up questions. Oh, I haven't heard that before. What specifically can I do to improve? So what came next remains to this day the most embarrassing string of ums and ahs and backtracking that I've ever experienced. And needless to say, nobody gained anything from it. and we both left infinitely more. Luckily, I debriefed with my staff, Sebastian, and this is where the lesson comes. What he said to me, just like with Adam Quinn, has stuck with me ever since and has changed the way that I view the teacher student relationship. He not only taught me that robots can feel, that flip phones still exist, but that it's our responsibility, our job, basically, to find something that our learners can improve. So he hits me with that like blank Sebastian stare, that little head tilt he does that says, I accept your human brain can only store so much. And he says, Richard, slowly calculating. The way I think about it, if I can't find something meaningful and actionable for you to improve on at the end of every shift, then I've failed as a teacher. Everybody will teach you something, whether you want them to or not. On both sides of this relationship, be open minded, be humble. Learn how to give and receive feedback because that's how we as clinicians and we as human beings learn and improve, especially in our departments. It's feedback is always coming from a safe place, a good place of growth. And it's more than okay and often the right thing to do to ask for help. Think about what's beneath the surface. Seek out different perspectives because there are many ways, both in medicine and in life, to do the same thing. Now that we've nailed down, honed our story, hello, which is the most important part of any talk, we can and create our supportive media. Now, we won't dwell too much on this because I believe it's the overarching principles that are going to be the most, that matter the most. But just like before, what is your main message and how can you craft the slides in order to support, not replace those main messages? Here are some quick tips. One, for the love of all that is good, please use high resolution images. There's nothing like some pixelated, crappy looking image to break people's immersion, to break the engagement. There are so many places to get high resolution images for free that there is no excuse. There's Pixabay, Pexels, PicWizard, FreePic, all of these things. What's even worse, what I've seen actually, is watermarks. Like, if you have a watermark on your picture, you stole it. You didn't pay for it, and we know. Please do not. And the last thing to kind of consider here is you reading from a PowerPoint slide does not equal teaching. So whenever you can, high resolution images, not lines of text. Infographics, not lines of text. But from there, another way to make your presentation look super professional is to stay consistent in terms of your font, in terms of your color palette. And this is super easy to do. Just whip onto Google, type in professional, minimal, PowerPoint template, and you'll come up with like hundreds. And lastly, data slides. So this is one of my big pet peeves, and we're gonna just gloss over this because we could talk about it for a while. But suffice it to say, if you say, I know this is a messy slide, but then you're doing it wrong, make it better. Nobody wants to see your massive table with 100 different numbers, only for you to bring up your little red box. And some people don't even do the red box, but if that's what's important, then that's all that needs to be applied. Oh, but Richard, you say, I love my p-values. My audience needs it for reference. Two things. One, I can guarantee you your audience is going to fact check you, cross check you. They're not going to go back to your talk. They're going to go back to the primary literature. And two, if your audience truly needs to see it, then dedicate a slide to it. And if not, say it. And if not, it doesn't need to be in your talk. So, off my soapbox. The most important part of the slides, after all that, is not actually the content, but the thought process that goes into making and editing those slides. That process of taking complex ideas and distilling them into simple images is where the money's at. And once those slides are made, the next steps are to cut and then cut and then cut some more. You want to cut anything that doesn't directly relate back to that main message and keep you focused, because you want people to remain focused, so you yourself focused. And you want to aim for something around like 80 to 85% of the allotted time, just to give time for like budging of stuff, questions, all of that. It's quality over quantity here. And so that brings us to the final part, the performance, attainment, and the delivery. So you've got to actually like practice your talk. You want to rehearse, and this is the litmus test, to the point where you're comfortable giving your talk without your slides. And you want practice at least once without your slides at all. Now, we're all busy people. And so my recommendation, if you don't have the time to do that, is to practice the beginning, to practice the end. Because again, these are the times when your audience is going to have the most attention span and the times that they're going to be most likely. This quote by the late, great Bruce Lee sums things up really well. I fear not the man who practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. And that's all that really needs to be said about this, I think. We all know that it needs to be done, but none of us, myself included, want to take the time to actually do this. It really is as simple as blocking off the time and practicing. So I think it'd be a little bit of an understatement to say that COVID has affected us all, but seeing as the majority of our talks in the near future are going to be virtual meetings, virtual presentations, I thought I'd give 3 kind of quick hitters to help you elevate your virtual presentations over the majority of the rest of virtual presentations. And so to signpost things, we'll talk about motion, talk about standing, and audio. So this is the setup from which I'm giving this presentation right now, and you can refer to it while we talk about these things. So emotion. Making eye contact is of the utmost importance. You're not in a lecture hall where you can kind of scan across the crowd and make eye contact with different people. You have to actually look at the camera, which is actually quite like unnatural. So I don't have it in the picture there, but if you take a sticky note and you put a little smiley face on it, and you stick it right next to your camera, it'll remind you that that's where you're supposed to be looking. Like whenever we, deliver bad news or anything like that, we do 2 things. We make eye contact and we sit at the eye level of the patient. So that's another important thing. You want your camera to be at eye level. If you have a laptop, it's going to be like down on your table here, and people are going to see your nostrils when they want to see your eyes. So it's just as easy as like you see here. I've jerry-rigged a bunch of boxes, but put that camera at eye level. The other thing here is because people don't have the benefit of your physical presence and your body language, like you can only see me from the shoulders up here, you have to exaggerate your emotions, your facial expressions, your intonations in order to get that emotion across. And to do that, you need to at least give a thought towards what your lighting looks like. You don't want to be overexposed, underexposed. I think that's all we'll say about that, but you don't want to be that person who's like a shadow or that person who's can't see them because it's anyways. From there, stand up. I guarantee you this is the easiest thing that you can implement, but if you stand during a presentation, you will naturally move your arms around more. Your face will move more. Your voice will go up and down more. You'll be a more expressive person just through the simple fact of going from sitting to standing. And lastly, just give a thought to your audio and your audio quality. So as much as we harped on it, like low resolution images, video, people can get over that, but it is exceedingly difficult to stay engaged with a talk when the speaker is cutting in and out, there's a baby in the background, when there are dogs in the background, static, any of that stuff is very difficult to stay engaged with. So just a few simple things like making sure you're in a quiet room, closing the door, filling your room with stuff to eliminate echo. And if you're doing this a lot, maybe investing in like a proper microphone. All of these are things that you can think about. Here we are, the end of the road. Cap it all off. What have we learned? Well, we've learned that the best way to deliver a good talk and to make your life better in general is to learn to form compelling narratives. The story has a beginning that captivates the audience and delivers an empowerment promise, middle that delivers your message through a well-crafted narrative and makes the audience feel, and an ending that solidifies your conclusions and your impacts. From there, your slides, the most important part to remember here is they support message, support what you're saying, not replace it. The less that's on them, the more that the audience will actually listen to you. Lastly, the performance, the delivery, the entertainment, as we've seen, is very important and needs dedicated time. Everything good must come to an end. So here it is, our last story within a story, and our last lesson. And this one is a tale of perspective on how the lens through which we view residency can change our lived experience. So this happened just earlier this year. We were about halfway through our first pass of Rosens. And for those of you who are going to go into it next year, the large cohort of you who are going into it next year, you will start measuring things in how far you are in Rosens. But I was working a civic urgent care shift in the morning, working with the legend himself, Dr. Stephen the Bernard Choi. You can follow him at Bernard the Choi on Twitter. You might know him from such hits as Pissing Excellence and Guardians of the Effing Galaxy. Anyways, I'm always a bit early to shifts. I like to get, like a lay of the land before I head in. So he walks in like Under Armour polo on, slaps a Kirkland protein bar in my hand, and gives me that Psycho Steve stare. And from there, we get cracking. So he pushes me, and he pushes me pretty hard. And we're moving quickly. Halfway through the shift, probably, we're seeing a number of patients that I'd be happy with an entire shift. And so we finish up, and he murders me with a practice oral on isoniazid poisoning. And we start chatting about life and its mysteries, fifth year. And so it is kind of a tough year, no doubt. And I was worried going into it. Then he hits me with this absolute knowledge bomb. And to be honest, like every other lesson, he really helped to put things into perspective. And I don't know if I'd have come out of R5 the same way if he hadn't taken the time to run through this. Richard says, if you went to the Royal College website right now and you looked at the pass rate, what would you see? Well, like 2017, 2019, 99%. Yeah. Of all the high stakes exams that you've written in your life, and that's more than a few, all of you are basically expert exam writers by now, like the MCAT, the MCCs, the NACOSC, whatever. Of all of those, this one has the highest pass rate. You've basically been studying for it ever since you decided to do Emerge. So the highest pass rate, you've already been studying for longer than any other exam. You've done it before. You're going to do it again. You guys are all going to pass. So this was a good dose of perspective for me. Very hard to see it in the moment, but I can't tell you how many times during this year I came back to that thought or that feeling. And it just goes to show that, like, taking a little bit of time, the little things that we do for other people have tremendous impact. What came next was so un-Steve like, but also very profound. He goes on. Now that you know you're going to pass, the most important thing is to take care of the machine. Machine, what is he talking about? You come into this department and you crush it. You go home, you study, and you crush it. But what everybody forgets is that you have to crush your recovery. When you take a break, you do it right. None of this half-assed, distracted, sorry excuse for relaxing. You find whatever it is fulfills you, whatever it is brings you joy, and you don't compromise. You crush that too. This whole year, more of a mind game than it is anything else. So important. You got to take care of yourself. The residency is not easy. Nobody ever said it would be, nor is it supposed to be. We're all in Emerge and we're all in medicine because of the far-reaching impacts that we can have, and quite literally because it's the best job in the world. Best, but it can also be the worst. There are, like everything else, ups and downs. But if you can ride and appreciate the ups, you can temper yourself through those downs. If you, both inside and outside of medicine, can make time for what truly matters, like taking a little bit of extra time to make your patient feel like family, or making sure you actually nurture meaningful relationships with your own family, then I guarantee you those highs will feel a little bit higher. Those lows will feel just a little bit low. I know this because I've experienced it from the other end, and I'm sure you have as well. I would be nowhere if not for the kindness and generosity of others. And the stories that I told today are in the innumerable other experiences that I've had over the past 5 years. I didn't trade any of it away. Learning and growing, all of you. Not just those pictured, but with all of you. So be adventurous, be vulnerable, take risks, because you're surrounded by people who will elevate you when you succeed and who will support you fall. A little bit of homework, and you can take a time to think about it now, but think of someone who's positively impacted you, someone that you're grateful for, and hold that person in your mind. And right after this talk, or maybe later tonight, thank them. Let them know that what they did, you. I guarantee that little bit of gratitude will go a long way. I tell these stories not because they're particularly exciting, special, but because we've all had versions of them. Stories that in the moment we don't realize, but afterwards we see have shaped us and made us into who we are, that have changed irreversibly the way that we view the world. With that last thought in mind, it's been great fun being here. It's really fascinating seeing what you folks are doing at the University of Ottawa and Ottawa Hospital. I've been simulated, supported, been incredible, and I can't wait to come back. Oh, my mic's still on, Tim. Alrighty, camera's coming back on. I'm presentable once more. Again, thanks everybody for the experience and for all everybody's done for me. You guys know who you are. Yeah, rules are made to be broken, so I think in this talk especially. Any questions that anybody has about presentations and how we incorporate this into medical talks? Any questions about my Star Wars stuff? Saw some comment about it. Well, think then if there are no questions, again, I have no words really to describe the experience that I've had and the gratitude that I have for everybody who's affected us over the past 5 years. And I think I can speak for our entire year when I say that it's been a blast. Thank you everybody for coming, and see you all on the other side.